Women's Death Metal History Month continues, so thanks for joining us again. We looked at some of the great all-women death metal bands from all around the world from the last several decades. Just to clarify, there was way more than that. There's plenty more that we need to cover at some point, and so maybe we'll do that in a future video, like Mortifera from Brazil, or Gilgamesh from Mexico, or many of these bands I'll actually mention in this video today too. And so what we're going to focus on today are some of my favorite vocalists that are guttural vocalists, death metal vocalists. And just to clarify, this is not a comprehensive video. You would need hundreds of videos to encompass all the incredible women that do guttural vocals from all around the world over the last several decades. So what I'm going to be giving you today is, since we've got 31 days in the in Women's History Month, I'm going to give you 31 of my favorite death metal vocalists that are women. And just to qualify this in terms of my taste is, what I'm looking for is real low guttural vocals. We're talking about Cookie Monster vocals, we're talking about toilet noises, garbage disposal sounds. You'll even find some women that do predator vocals on this list. And so I'm not too big, just in terms of my personal taste, on that arch enemy style, like mid-range guttural that comes out of the mellow death Gothenburg scene. I also don't like the high type of vocals that the Black Dahlia Murder does, those nasally kind of highs. And so there's a lot of women that do those styles really well, and they're very talented at that stuff. But that's just in terms of my personal taste, not what you're going to find on this list. You're going to find those low gutturals. And so let's jump into it. Here are some of my favorites. Let's see how many of their names I mispronounce. And we're going to do this in chronological order, so let's start with some of the earliest women that were doing guttural death metal vocals, and then we'll move up to some more recent ones. So let's crush! We have to start this list with Lori Bravo of Nuclear Death, who have some called the mother of all death metal. Nuclear Death goes all the way back to 1986, and Lori was always their vocalist, initially was their bassist, and eventually handled guitar duties too. When we talk about the origins of women doing death metal vocalists, this is largely where it starts. Nuclear Death's early material is still some of the wildest, grindiest, most insane music you'll ever hear. Lori's feral vocals switch between a multitude of styles that are high energy and intense. Later in her career, she increasingly used clean vocals, but even her howling, haunting, clean vocals are fantastic, which remind of the great Diamanda Galás. 2 years after Nuclear Death formed, Pennsylvania death doom band Derketa formed. Guitarist and vocalist Sharon Biskowski is next on the list, and she was one of the first women in death metal and first women that utilized guttural vocals. Her vocals are still incredible. They're dry and low, sounding like something that the Finnish scene would become known for, but before even they had widely adopted that style. The stupidly heavy riffing reminds of Celtic Frost, and when combined with Sharon's wonderful vocals, it makes for death metal perfection. She has a wonderful way that she elongates certain words and syllables for emphasis, and others she'll cut off abruptly for the same reason. She just rules at everything she does, and I hope that the long-awaited new Derketa material eventually comes to fruition, because I can't wait to hear it. Sharon and the rest of Derketa are originators for this style of music, and it's insane that in a couple more years she'll have been writing crushing riffs and belting out powerful growls for 4 decades. Next up is Corine van de Brand, vocalist and bassist for Dutch band Acrostichan, who also handles vocals in the death metal band Brut and the thrash metal band Resend. She has great performances on many albums, and she's been doing this stuff since back in 1989, but the one I'd really like to focus on is the classic 1993 old school death metal album Engraved in Black by Acrostichan. Corine is incredibly brutal here, and it makes Acrostichan's magnum opus all the better for it. The drumming, the songwriting, the guitar tone are all sublime here, but it's Corine's vocals that bring this up to perfection. There's a ton of power and energy behind them, and you can almost hear the reverberations coming from her gut. Engraved in Black is a death metal masterpiece, and if you don't have it in your collection, it's definitely time to change that. Rinnie Lippman of Mystic Charm. Rinnie is a Dutch vocalist that first formed the classic death doom band Mystic Charm in 1989. They had a couple of demos and an EP, but the album we really need to talk about her vocals on is Mystic Charm's essential 1994 debut, Shadows of the Unknown, which is widely regarded as one of the best death doom albums of all time. It's a stupidly heavy, haunting album, and Rinnie's raspy, black metal-esque croak and memorable vocal patterns help bring in plenty of occult atmosphere. If you're into death doom, definitely pick this one up. up if you haven't already. It has been reissued in every format over the last several years by Memento Mori, Headsplit Records, Nuclear War Now, and Darker Than Darkness Records, so pick your poison. Dana Duffy, guitarist and vocalist of Messick. She also later handled guitars and vocals in the black metal band Demonic Christ, and she was still using low gutturals and had plenty of death metal still in Demonic Christ's 1993 Deceiving the Heavens demo. But my focus today will be on her work in the more overtly death metal band Messick. Messick released 2 demos in 1991 and then an EP in 1993. Dana was only a teenager most of that time, and not only did she write primal, ridiculously heavy songs that are still heavier than just about everything nowadays, she was also doing monstrous, low guttural vocals even as basically a kid. That mystic material really broke the mold at the time, and Dana's vocals were a huge influence on many vocalists and musicians for generations to come. For example, when I first launched Women's Death Metal History Month this year, Sarah Lynn, the wife of Maddie Way, reached out to me and said that Dana Duffy was one of Maddie Way's influences. Maddie Way is one of the most celebrated vocalists in brutal death metal, having done vocals in Disgorged, Abominable Putridity, Liturgy, Pathology, Cinerary, and plenty of others. Many brutal death metal vocalists emulate him. So let's track Dana Duffy's influence and impact through only just this one musician, Maddie Way. Dana Duffy created Messick, and as a teenager, she was doing guttural vocals all the way back in 1991. Her influence was so broad that her powerful vocals even influenced people that later were progenitors of the brutal death metal subgenre, and now decades later, it's hard to find a brutal death metal vocalist that wasn't influenced by Maddie Way. So in another way, it's hard to find a brutal death metal vocalist that wasn't, at least indirectly, influenced by Dana Duffy. And that's just talking about brutal death metal. You could easily say the same for every other subgenre of death metal, especially death doom. Karen Crisis, vocalist for Crisis, Ethel Duath, and Gospel of the Witches. Karen Crisis is an interesting one because she's done many things that are death metal adjacent, but I wouldn't call any of those projects death metal, although some have certainly called the early Crisis material death metal. There are many genres of music that Crisis encompassed. I've included her largely because she has unquestionably served as a gateway artist to get many people into extreme metal, including death metal, and she's also somebody that was heavily ingrained in the extreme metal scene and has had a huge impact on death metal and extreme metal, but in maybe less obvious ways. Her band Crisis started in 1993, and the early days of that band included a lot of death and thrash elements. She used many vocal styles, and guttural vocals were among them. For many, this was the first time they heard a woman growling and screaming. She continued to use guttural vocals, among other styles, on the 2 great Ethel Duath albums that she was on. Those were a couple of really interesting avant-garde extreme metal albums that included the likes of Steve DiGiorgio from Death, Eric from Hate Eternal and Cannibal Corpse, and Marco Miniman from Necrophagus and the Ologicists, some of the best musicians inside or outside of death metal. Perhaps her most death metal appearance was when she appeared as a guest vocalist on the 6 Feet Under song Sick and Twisted off their 2001 True Carnage album. Her latest active project is the Gospel of the Witches, a gothic/doom metal project that still uses occasional gutturals. The first of those Gospel of the Witches albums, 2015 Salem's Wounds, had Ross Dolan from Immolation handling backing vocals. I wouldn't call her a death metal vocalist, but she was a major player in the development of extreme metal and is revered among the progenitors of death metal and served as a gateway for many fans to get into more extreme metal. She's a legend that has earned her place as an influential guttural vocalist, and so she's on this list. Rachel Hazer, former vocalist for Pathology, Occult, Infinited Hate, and of course the almighty Sinister. The first band she was in was Pathology, an international project that is not to be mixed up with the Pathology from Ohio. This Pathology featured members from the Netherlands and Belgium and formed in 1990. Rachel first took over vocals for their 1993 Total Desecration demo. This was another early example of a woman doing full-on death metal gutturals in an old-school death metal band. That Pathology demo still rules. Rachel was on a couple more releases with them, including a 1994 split and a 2013 full-length. From 1996 to 2002, she was also in the death thrash band Occult. She started with a thrashier approach in that band, but integrated more gutturals as the band progressed. I love the few releases she did with the blasphemous, brutal death metal band Infinite Hate, too. Vocals were split between her and the more Glenn Benton-esque sounding Ad Kloosterward. Both of them would also handle vocals for Dutch death metal legend Sinister, but at different times. Rachel was the vocalist on Sinister's 2001 Creative Killings and 2003's Savage or Grace albums. She's incredibly brutal on both. Creative Killings is an especially savage album and is really underrated in Sinister's discography. Rachel's vocals are deep, have a ton of power, and have an intensity that fits the evil vibe that both Sinister and Infinite Hate were going for. She also has a guest appearance on Howitzer's sophomore album. It looks like she hasn't been on anything since 2013, so I hope we haven't heard the last of her. Marita Kircher, vocalist and guitarist of German all-female death metal band Vocalists. Vocalists put out a demo in 1996 and an EP in 1998, and then a full length in 2000 before disbanding. Supposedly there was another album that was recorded that wasn't released as well. It's really heavy stuff with diverse and human guttural vocals from Marita. Their Bortus EP has some pretty insane bass work throughout too, if that's something you dig as much as I do. Marita is a strong songwriter and rules as a vocalist, so it's unfortunate that Vocalists ended in 2002. She contributed artwork to the project as well. All of their material rules, and it's a band that desperately needs a discography compilation to happen someday. And if there is another album that hasn't been released, let's get that out into the world. I want to hear that. Zdenka Kato of Estuary, Surgikill, Faith Extractor, and formerly of 40 Days Longing. Zdenka is a Bolivian woman that has been a huge staple of the Ohio death metal scene for decades. She's been an incredible bassist in many projects, but she's also contributed vocals to multiple projects, and I'd say she's one of the most underrated and underappreciated figures when it comes to her contributions to death metal. I have to highlight two of the projects she contributed to vocally here, but note that she shreds as a musician in other projects too, including Faith Extractor, who should also definitely check out. The first I'm going to talk about today is the epic, raw, and haunting 1998 Head of the Demon demo by 40 Days Longing. There's even violin that sounds so sinister on this ridiculous demo. Zdenka howls her guts out on this, spanning everything from low gutturals to a higher, croakier death vomit. It's versatile and just really demonstrates somebody just putting everything into a performance. If you like Death Doom and haven't heard this, you absolutely need to. It's so dark and sad and melancholic and heavy and ultimately just powerful. The use of violin is especially underappreciated in Death Doom. As if that wasn't enough, 4 years later, Zdenka took over for vocals for Estuary. If you've never heard Estuary before, it's some of the best thrashy, melodic death metal stuff you've ever heard. And I'm not talking about Gothenburg-style melodeath, I'm talking about a band that throws in melodic shred, like intestinalism or vehemence. A common theme you'll find with all of Zdenka's bands is how underrated they are. If you pick any of them up and then listen to them, you'll say to yourself, this is so good. Why don't other people know about this? In Estuary, Zdenka uses a more traditional death metal vocal approach that's low, guttural, and has a lot of power. She still uses elongated growls when it makes sense and uses some higher registers on occasion too, but in general she's using much lower vocals here than what she used in 40 Days Longing. Her vocals pair incredibly well with the blasting ferocity and melodies found in Estuary's music. Ash Thomas, also Faith Extractor and Surgikill, contributes additional vocals here. If you haven't heard Estuary yet, you're seriously missing out. They have 3 releases and all of them rule. She also contributed vocals to some of Surgikill's material in addition to handling bass. She also did some great guest vocal appearances on a few other albums too. People in the Ohio scene know what a legend she is and how much she's contributed to death metal, and it's about time that you know too. April Taylor, vocalist of Butchery and Exuviate. The band she was in was called different names at different times, including Exuviate, Sanguinary Carnage, Butchery, and Grotesque Euphoria. April handled vocals on Butchery's 1998 demo The Coming Plague and Exuviate's 2000 self-titled full length. Both albums are insane, chaotic, frenetic, brutal death metal albums that I think were way ahead of their time. Fans of a little weirdness in their brutal death, not unlike Terminally or Aborted Ghost, will love this stuff. April's vocals on this are wild and unhinged and span a variety of vocal styles from guttural lulls to howling screams. If you have a short attention span, Butchery and Exuviate say, challenge accepted. It's ridiculously good stuff that I think people would lose their minds over if a band on New Standard Elite sounded like this now. Sadly, I don't think April has been involved in extreme metal since that 2000 Exuviate album. So I'm not sure which matriarch vocalist I'm referring to here, but I'm pretty sure that it's Michelle Baez, but they always had multiple vocalists simultaneously, so I'm not sure. Matriarch were an insane band from Puerto Rico that formed in 2002. They had a mix of death metal and symphonic black metal with female operatic vocals well before Flesh God Apocalypse formed. That alone will make them a polarizing band, but if we go back to their 2003 Black Apples demo, this all-women band that featured 5 members included 4 members contributing vocals, each which contributed some different vocals on some different tracks. Now, I'm not completely sure who did which vocal style on which track on this demo. Vanessa Urrutia did the soprano, Isabel Conde handled grim vocals, and then Michelle Baez and Aracelis Lopez are both credited as doing vocals too, if Metalum is accurate. The point is, listen to the title track off that 2003 Black Apples demo. One of these women sounds like Frank Mullen in his prime. So for me, Frank Mullen might be the greatest death metal vocalist ever. One of these women sound a lot like him back in that Effigy of the Forgotten era. I've never heard more brutal vocals from a woman, or really from any other vocalist except from Frank back in that Effigy era, on a death metal album. I get chills with how ridiculously brutal the vocals are. I'm not sure if it was Michelle, Arcelis, or Isabel, but whoever recorded that unquestionably has some of the best death metal vocals. I only wish we had multiple full albums with those vocals because they're so incredibly good that it's almost disappointing that more death metal doesn't have vocals this good. Even the other 2 songs on that demo don't quite match up to what they did on that track. I don't usually put music in these videos, but I'll give you a taste because seriously, you've got to hear this. So somebody let me know which member of Matriarch did those vocals because they're so good. And perhaps more importantly, if she can still do those vocals, somebody get her back in a band. And yeah, there's some mic cupping going on there, but I'm totally fine with that. Frank Mullen did that too, and it sounds awesome. Jill Listen from Funerus. Funerus was a death metal band that the late great Jill Listen began as the bassist in back in 1993. Before the release of their second full-length, Reduced to Sludge, in 2011, Jill had also taken over vocal duties, and her vocals rule. Reduced to Sludge is heavy in its own right, but you can even find plenty of live clips of her crushing their earlier material on vocals and bass too. As a bit of death metal nerd information, John McEntee of Incantation, who was her former husband, also played guitar in Funerus. Jill was not only a death metal legend, she was a huge supporter of this scene, even as her health was declining. I'd see her at Maryland Death Fest year after year, anytime her health would allow it. She was always the sweetest and had nothing but kind things to say despite her own struggles. Jill was a legend both on and off the stage, and I can't say enough kind words about her. Her recent passing was a huge loss for death metal. Much love and rest in peace, Jill. Marissa Martinez Hoadley, guitarist and vocalist of death grind band Cretin and old school death metal band Extremity. She even spent some time as the guitarist in Repulsion. Cretin is basically death grind perfection, and if you're familiar with Repulsion, you'll have some idea of what to expect from both the music and from her vocals. Her coarse, bellowed vocals work really well in the context of Extremity's couple of old school death metal albums too. In general, I think that the Extremity project was underappreciated. Her riffs ruled and her vocals are awesome in both death grind and old school contexts. Leila Abdul-Ra, who has been the guitarist and vocalist for many projects, but is best known for her work in Vastum. Vastum formed in 2009, and they play a heavy style of dark, old-school death metal. Her guttural vocals with a tinge of reverb add a ton of atmosphere. She's pretty versatile as she uses lows, highs, ultra-lows, and a few other styles. Vastum continue to be one of the best and most consistent modern death metal bands, and Leila's abilities as a vocalist, guitarist, and songwriter are to be commended for that. She also plays and handles vocals for bands that encompass many other styles of metal, showing further exactly how versatile she is as both a musician and as a singer. Mikiko Suda from Flagellus Idiosyncrasy in the Dilapidation, Monier, and Tremendous Terror. We're going more death grind and grindcore territory with this one, but Mikiko is an incredibly high-energy vocalist that alternates between a higher grindcore screech and a brutal, guttural death metal growl. Her death metal vocals are legit, and she alternates between both vocal styles in quick succession. Flagellus Idiosyncrasy in the Dilapidation has previously played Maryland Death Fest, and I remember being blown away by their set in 2015. She makes a similar approach in Monier, a band with a more brutal death grind approach than Flagellus Idiosyncrasy that reminds me of Insect Warfare, Gridlink, and Wormrot. She was also the vocalist in Tremendous Terror, a death metal project that also featured Hiromasa Miyoshi from Disconformity, Glossectomy, and Viscera Infest. They were both on the Tremendous Terror cassette called Unjustified Existence, but I can't find any information about when that was released, maybe 2001, or where it can be heard. Somebody help us out, because there's no way that the 6 tracks and an intro on that don't rule. All of us would be better off with that music in our lives. Mallika Sundaramurthy, formerly of Abnormality, Unfathomable Ruination, Castrator, and Parasitic Extirpation, and currently of Emasculator in the Doris, is the next incredible vocalist I want to discuss. I don't think a lot of younger metal fans realize how influential Mallika was in getting a whole new generation of women and men into brutal music. Back in 2013, Abnormality dropped a music video for the first track off their debut album. The song was Monarch Omega. Yes, there were guttural vocalists before Mallika. We've discussed some of them already. Derketa and Messick had their claim to fame going back to the early 90s, but those were death doom bands. People had heard like mid-range gutturals in the likes of Arch Enemy and a digestible melodeath musical style, but prior to Monarch Omega dropping on YouTube, death metal fans had not really seen a woman do guttural vocals in a brutal death metal band. There were some women that did it, but you'd have to really go deep and have extensive knowledge about the scene. The music video for Monarch Omega was a revelation. It has over 3 million views. When it dropped, it immediately went viral. Everyone, women and dudes, told everybody else, "You have to see this video. This woman absolutely crushes guttural vocals." That goes for me too. We were all excitedly showing everybody that we knew. Mallika had a commanding presence, and her vocal patterns were tight, polished, professional, like a veteran of the guttural vocal style. She also didn't have a bunch of layering or reverb that lesser vocalists hide behind. What might have started as a novelty, a woman doing guttural vocals, quickly changed into multiple generations of fans realizing that Mallika was not a novelty, she was an astounding vocalist and performer, and I don't think it could be understated that multiple generations of fans, millions of people, saw that video for the first time, and it might have helped them get into extreme metal. We're probably talking about a lot of youth too, just in their bedrooms, growling along with what she was doing. If there was a glass ceiling for brutal death metal, Mallika obliterated it. She did that once as the vocalist in Abnormality. She did it a second time when she broke lyrical genre norms in Castrator. She expanded on that and introduced new lyrical themes from her own heritage in Emasculator. And I also don't think she gets enough credit for the Predator vocals she used in the Doris, which is a vocal style popularized by Joe Wolf of Heinous Killings that very few men can do, and I don't think I'd heard any other woman do it before Mallika, and even afterwards, I hadn't heard a woman perform that style until Bridget Lynch from Stabbing used them on the most recent Stabbing album. I was lucky enough to have Mallika do guest vocals on the title track of my band Maime's last album, Propagate Onslaught, and I was blown away by how tight her vocal patterns were. It's one thing to hear her on an album, but it really humbled me further to receive those vocal tracks and realize exactly how good she is at what she does. I think people underappreciate how important Mallika has been for brutal music and how good she is in terms of tightness and vocal patterns and the effort she puts into lyrics and everything that she does when it comes to brutal music. Next is Simone, often referred to as Sam Bloomers from Cerebral Bore. She might not have had one of the smoother experiences in metal, and she has said that she has quit music since 2018, but there's no question that she's one of the most brutal vocalists we've seen in death metal, which is highlighted best by Cerebral Bore's 2010 album Maniacal Miscreation. She's earned legendary status. She was no nonsense and just absolutely crushed with her powerful mix of guttural vocals and pig squeals. She had terrific vocal patterns that elevated all of the material she was on. Her last recording that she contributed to was as one of the 2 vocalists on the tech melodeath album Ex Nihilo by Your Chance to Die in 2017, which was decent for what it was, but I don't think it highlighted her abilities as well as a brutal death metal album would. She still kills it there too, with the powerful wet and guttural vocals that she's been known for. I can only hope that someday some decent human beings that she enjoys working with bring her out of retirement so she can keep annihilating, because she's insanely talented. Julia Warrior, who has been in many Black Death and grind bands, but I'm going to focus on her role as the guitarist and vocalist of Into Darkness, and as the guitarist, bassist, and vocalist in death grind band Mindful of Pripyat. Julia formed Into Darkness back in 2011. The band started out as a death doom band on their self-titled 2012 demo, but on their later material they've taken a more direct death metal approach. Their self-titled demo is a great one to start with. The pained howls on that one almost remind me of Martin Van Drunen at times, which rules. Her vocal patterns in Pripyat were part of a triple vocal assault by all the band members that included rapid-fire exchanges between death metal growls, higher shrieks, and some startlingly awesome gore grind gutturals. I'm not sure who did which vocal style there, but it's intense and phenomenal. It's a completely different musical approach from Into Darkness, but both projects are stupendous, and so is her work in both of them. By the way, if you can recommend any women doing that Martin Van Drunen style or a John Tardy kind of style of vocal, I'd love to hear more of those too. Let me know in the comments. Ariadne Souza, who was in the Brazilian death metal band Valhalla from 2005 to 2019. Her vocals are sick and guttural, but what makes her one of my favorite guttural vocalists is that she played drums while doing it. Watch any live performance of her in Valhalla, and it's sure to be one of the most badass live clips you've ever seen. It's one thing to play slower stuff and occasionally do backing vocals, it's a whole nother thing to play fast, aggressive death metal while lashing out with guttural vocals from your gut. Ariadne is an absolute monster. She plays in the black metal band Myasthenia now that has been around since 1994, but she primarily handles drums there. It was a magic moment in death metal history when she decimated stages as both the vocalist and the drummer in Valhalla. Els Prins from Dutch band Sisters of Suffocation, who were originally a band composed entirely of women. Els is a vocalist that mixes low, brutal vocals with higher screams. They brought in some cleans later on too. For me, it's all about the gutturals, so their 2016 EP, Brutal Queen, that's a great starting point. Those are gutturals that you'd have no idea weren't coming from a dude. She also heavily uses a higher vocal, which works well enough and it isn't nearly as grating as most people that use higher vocals, at least to my ear, but my personal preference is always to keep those high vocals to a minimum. Bridget Lynch from Stabbing, Piosified, and Nephilim Grinder. Bridget has been entrenched in the brutal death metal scene and has been belting out guttural vocals since she was a teenager. She knows her stuff and has always pushed herself to continue to flourish as a vocalist. Bridget skyrocketed to fame, at least in the death metal world, with the breakthrough of the band Stabbing, which was formed in 2021. Stabbing has since gone through some lineup changes, but continues to produce brutal death metal of increasing quality that is catapulted further by Bridget. The meteoric rise of Stabbing even yielded Bridget the position of filling in for Suffocation's vocalist during one of their performances in 2023, unquestionably a dream of anybody that is a brutal death metal vocalist. I'm certain that she'll inspire and serve as the role model for a whole new generation of both women and men to start getting into extreme metal. I predict that Bridget will have the same influence for her generation that Malika had on the generation prior. I also want to acknowledge that she continues to expand and develop as a vocalist, as demonstrated by the use of Predator vocals on the latest album by Stabbing. If you haven't heard Stabbing yet, you surely will soon, as they're getting plenty of prime tour slots, so Bridget and Stabbing will likely crush a stage near you very soon. She's put in the work, and she's earned it. Unaware attendees of these tours might initially be struck by a woman doing brutal vocals if they don't know their stuff and aren't familiar, but they'll quickly become fans because Bridget is incredible at what she does. Lisa Vassard, guitarist and vocalist from Anachronism. Anachronism are a technical disso-death band from Switzerland that reminds me of bands like Gorguts and Artificial Brain. Lisa is not only incredibly inventive as a guitarist with plenty of mathy and progressive and contemplative song structures present with each Anachronism release, but her guttural vocal style has almost a pained, howling quality to it that works wonderfully well for Anachronism's style of dissonant death metal. They have to be one of the most underrated active bands out there. They're incredible, and I wish they'd get on a label that could do a better job at distributing their music, or at least pressing it in larger quantities. They're ridiculously good and underrated, and Lisa's absolutely one of the most talented people in death metal. Silalik Gomez from the Mexican death metal band Spit on Your Grave. Their 2004 EP, Existential Murderer, is brutal, almost slammy stuff, and Zilalik's brutal guttural vocals are exactly what you'd expect from that style of music. She recorded 2 albums and an EP with Spit on Your Grave. She uses multiple vocal styles, and they're all variations of an ultra-low, brutal style. Each Spit on Your Grave album sounds a bit different, with even some more black metal influence coming in later, but for my personal taste, that brutal 2014 EP might be their peak, and it's where Silalik similarly sounds her most brutal. Maddie Kilpatrick, vocalist and lead guitarist for Cemetery Filth. Maddie is one of the biggest shredders on this list, and she also has some sick, dark-howled vocals that remind of Chuck Schuldiner that go a little bit into Van Drunen or Chris Reifert kind of territory, since her vocals are a little bit deeper than Chuck's, and she has a pretty versatile approach. Her labyrinthine creative riffing combined with that pained, howled vocal make for something really unique. Her band out of Atlanta, Georgia are easily one of the most underappreciated bands over the last decade. Millie Crampton, who goes by the stage name Beryl, is vocalist for the death grind band Basement Torture Killings. When I lived in England, I went to a metal festival that was for raising funds for cancer research. I went in blind and wasn't familiar with any of the bands that were playing. I was completely blown away when Basement Torture Killings took the stage. The whole band have a striking aesthetic, with most members looking like movie serial killers, but then there was Beryl, who was this weird duality, by design, of adorable innocence and nightmarish grotesquerie. Her stage performance further reinforces this, as I saw her take out a stuffed animal, seemingly cuddly and innocent, and then she tore bloody entrails from its stomach. The band threw blood bags into the audience, and Beryl had to communicate to me after the show that the blood was drinkable wine, since I was confused about what was going on. Her vocals similarly stand out. They're guttural and powerful, but have a manic, high energy to them that helps elevate Basement Torture Killings to something really special. Her vocals are distinct and also immediately identifiable. She has one of those unique tones that you don't really hear from other vocalists. Their new EP from last year, The Gallery of Monsters Part 1, is a great starting point if you've never heard them before. Irohana, or her Korean name shown on the screen here, Ona-un, was the vocalist in the band Traitor from 2016 to 2021, and prior to that was the vocalist for Manic Sive's 2016 EP Pandora. The release I want to highlight, though, is the very deep-cut gem Fourth Rated Waste, the debut EP put out by Traitor, a Korean death metal band from Busan, back in 2018. Musically, the album walks that line between old-school death, a little bit of brutal death, and lots of groove, but it's all insanely catchy. Irohana uses a mixture of guttural vocals with occasional layered high screams. It's stupidly brutal and ridiculously catchy. The vocal patterns are unforgettable. I always find myself singing along to this EP, which I listen to all the time. There are also some weird moments of inspiration, like using a burp in place of a Tom Warrior grunt during a transition. Traitor are still active, but Irohana is no longer part of their lineup, and they've gone in a slightly different musical direction. But I still hope that we soon hear Irohana in another project. Zero the Traitor is a good album too, by the way. I just go really hard for that Fourth Rated Waste EP. Nuvis Martin of Amenorrhea, who does have a stage name, but it isn't YouTube friendly, so you'll have to look that up on your own. Nuvis is a multi-instrumentalist that has played drums, bass, and keyboards in different bands spanning different genres, in addition to doing art and photography for several too. My focus for this video is her role as the vocalist in the Floridian death metal band Amenorrhea. She has great vocals that are primarily traditional old-school gutturals, but she'll occasionally use high vocals or layer in high vocals to emphasize some lyrics, and it makes her delivery more dynamic, not unlike how Glenn Benton would in Deicide. The tone of her highs reminds me of Glenn's too. If you need some ugly, old-school, heavy death metal about murder and serial killers, Amenorrhea is worth checking out. They're a little bit punky and thrashy at times too. They have a demo, a full length, and an EP out. Their first EP even had Jamie Avery of Demonomacy handling guitars. Nuvis & Co. just dropped a new single last year called Spontaneous Human Combustion, and that rolls too, and she had a little bit of extra experimentation with the vocals on that new song. Karis Series, vocalist and bassist for the technical progressive melodic death metal band Dalriata that are based in Glasgow, Scotland, and formed in 2017. Karis, like Beryl, has one of the most unique live aesthetics on this list. It's another interesting duality, as her stage presence includes long flowing sequin gowns and gemstones and glitter affixed to her face, which starkly contrasts her guttural vocals. She has a varied vocal approach that varies from a dry, raspy, lower guttural up through a more mid-paced growl that is more typical in that melodeath style. The band uses some occasional clean vocals too. It all works really well together. This Celtic-themed band is incredibly talented, and I continue to be confused why this band isn't on a label with wide distribution. The creative songwriting reminds me in parts of Quo Vadis from Canada. Approach Karis and her band as progressive death metal, and there's a ton of stuff to love there. They even have some sick bluesy leads that remind me of James Murphy's work. She's a sick bass player too, by the way. The whole band can just play the heck out of their instruments. Popo, and I'm not going to butcher the rest of her name, but you can see it on the screen here, of Jasad, Demon's Dam, and Soul of Slamming. Jasad are one of the most legendary Indonesian brutal death metal bands, as they go all the way back to 1990. Last year, they introduced a new vocalist, Popo. Some might have been surprised that their new vocalist was a woman. until they heard her. She has a varied vocal approach that nails that brutal death, garbage disposal vocal sound. Her mix of ultra gutturals and a more standard growl make for really dynamic vocal patterns. She kills it on the recent Jasad singles, but if you really want to hear what she can do while we wait on the new Jasad full length, check out the 2013 Retaliation album by Demon's Dam and the Soul of Slamming's Trilogy Asylum album from 2023. She has decent guttural vocals on that Demon's Dam EP, but it's clear that a decade later on the Soul of Slamming trilogy stuff that she really came into her own with a more varied vocal approach that made for some really memorable vocal patterns. Michelle J. from Grenouille. Grenouille are a brutal death metal band that play in the style of Brodequin. Michelle's vocals are obscenely brutal and guttural. Some parts remind me of the vocal style in the early Prostitute Disfigurement albums, but her vocals are a little bit more versatile than that. Other parts remind me of some of the styles that Sam from Cerebral Bore did so well. They've only put out one release, 2019's Extraction de la Essence EP, on which Michelle also plays bass. It's really sick stuff, and I hope they do more. It's all just so stupidly brutal, and I love it. Last but not least is Lucilia Serracata of the filthy death metal band Larvae. Lucilia handles guitars, vocals, and synths for this band from Italy, and her band by far is the filthiest, grossest band on this list. Her vocals have a good amount of gurgle, almost like a higher-pitched auntie from Demi-Leech, and she uses high vocals too that work really well. Usually I can't stand high vocals, but hers are great. They have a raw croak that you can hear that makes it feel like you're immersed in a horror movie. They're almost uncomfortable to listen to. Her band is really sludgy, really heavy, and even features drummer Tom Korn of Lycothea of Flame and Cult of Fire fame. If you just need to hear the most disgusting, heaviest, rawest, sludgiest death metal you've ever heard, you'll need to hear Lucilia Serracata and her band Larvae. Just make sure that you keep a vomit bag somewhere nearby. You should check out our work in Lurking Terror too, which is some awesome, gross, old-school death metal as well. And here's a fun fact for you that ups the gross larvae factor. Her name, Lucilia Serracata, is the scientific name for the green bottle blowfly that eats dead tissue, feces, and garbage. I do want to add two honorary mentions that I think should be included here too. When people think of women doing death metal vocals, Angela Gossow from Arch Enemy might be the first person that comes to mind. She's been huge for getting people into death metal as a gateway artist, and I thought she did a great job stepping into shoes of Arch Enemy vocalist Johan Leva back in 2000. I dig those early Arch Enemy albums with her. They're catchy and they're well written. But let's talk about what I'm looking for in this video, which is deep guttural vocals, unlike what we saw her perform in Arch Enemy. Before Angela was in Arch Enemy, she was in two other death metal bands. From 1990 to 1998, she was in Asmodina from Germany. Now here's where things get wild. In Asmodina, she did lower guttural vocals, far lower than anything she used in Arch Enemy. Check out any of her work with Asmodina to really hear something very different from her. I wonder why those lower registers were abandoned with Arch Enemy, because she was incredibly monstrous on that Asmodina material. It was during her era in Mistress where she started to primarily use that mid-range vocal instead of lower gutturals. I really dig her vocals in the early 90s, and I wish more of her fans could have heard when she was utilizing that much deeper approach. I also want to mention Fernanda Lira, best known for Crypta and Nervosa, but prior to that she was in a death thrash band called Hellarize. She does have some great guttural vocals, but I've never been a fan of the high vocals that she uses. Her vocal style alternates between gutturals and that higher nasally screamed vocal, and again, I just don't like that vocal style. I recognize that's just very much a me thing, so others might really enjoy that she combines those two different vocal styles. But for me, if she only used lows, I'd probably be a much bigger fan of most of the music she's put out. I'll also say that she might be one of the best frontmen, or front women in this case, ever. She commands the stage with an addictive, goofy energy, and she maintains those theatrics while simultaneously performing bass and vocals. She's incredibly charismatic. Despite being a figure that people tend to be very opinionated about, I think she's earned her place in death metal's ranks through relentless touring and through being fantastic at what she does. The high vocals kept her from being in my top 31, not unlike Angela, but both deserve praise not only for being outstanding performers and genuinely great people for their fans, but also for putting in the work and being so successful at it that they've brought legions of new fans into extreme metal, including death metal. So there is 31 of my favorite guttural vocalists, but there's way more out there, right? So please let me know in the comments if I left out some of your favorite vocalists. So that's it. like, subscribe, keep supporting women in death metal, and I'll see you next time.